Okay, Tov. Okay, Tov. We learned today, as always, the Ilu Nishmat Avigdor Chai Avram, but Meir Tzvi Rachel Leah and Shamash Even Aliyah. We are in the middle, and we will continue to be in the middle for quite a while. Perek Yud Aleph. We're in the small copy. We're on page 68, and we're about to start a paragraph that says V'yesh od acherim. V'yesh od acherim. And we're talking, the topic has been, that we ended off last week, was the topic of telling the truth, or emet. We talked about, so far, two different categories of people who tell lies, some which we could call in English pathological liars. They just invent stories. They make up stuff. They love to just tell you something that never occurred. There's one level down from that, and that's a person we would call in Hebrew shakran, person whose mahut, their personality, their characteristic is that they are liars. That's who they are. The second is a level down from that. It's not that they consistently lie, but they are more than happy to weave in falsehood in a story they may be telling over and adding details that never occurred. Does that mean if I tell you about something I did the other day, I went on a bus, I went to Yesharim, and I say it was sunny out when it wasn't? No, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about something that makes another person's ears perk up and make the story more juicy when it isn't true. You know, it never happened. There's an expression in Hebrew, it's not an expression. There's a Rashi Tevot, an abbreviation, lahadam. Lahadam means lo hayu dvarim me'olam, mean it never occurred. So when you put in something into the story to make yourself sound better, more important, I'll give you an example. Let's say you were somewhere that someone, God forbid, fainted, and you called Hatzalah. So you tell the story over. I was with somebody that I was in the street, they fainted, I called Hatzalah. You can't then say that before they got there, I started compressions, or I started mouth to mouth. If you didn't do it, I mean, that's, you may in your head may have done it. And by the way, sometimes we imagine things that we would have done, and that we start thinking back about the story that occurred, the imagination becomes reality. So sometimes you have difficulty discerning the difference between truth and fiction. So you got to be careful. So that's that second category. But there's a third category. Again, we're on a paragraph, for those of you just joining, a paragraph that starts V'yesh od acherim. Now you'll notice he refers to this at the 2 paragraphs ago and in this paragraph as a choli. A choli is an illness. An illness can be generally, hopefully, cured. And that's part of what this book is about. Don't forget that he's not just here to beat us over the head and tell us you shouldn't, you do this, you're a rotten person, God forbid. That's not what the purpose is at all. The purpose is for us to be aware and to correct our ways. So he says, there are those who have a lower level, quote, illness when it comes to telling the truth or lack thereof, that's less or lower level than the first ones he's mentioned. They're the people who are not, so to speak, stuck by always weaving in falsehood into their statements. But they're not so careful to distance themselves from telling a falsehood. If it just happens, they'll just pop it in there. You know, when I called Hatzalah the other day, while I was waiting, I was checking the guy's pulse. Not true. Is that as bad as saying, that you did something, that you saved the world, you found the cure for cancer? No, of course not, but it's still not the truth. And other times, the person may just joke around. They'll say just false, it's a joke. Okay, with absolutely no intention that's bad. For whatever, just stick stuff in there. So think for a second, what's the big deal? What's the harm if I say, even in a joke, in that case, I call out, so, while I was waiting for him, I was checking the guy's pulse to make sure he was alive. And I didn't do that. What's the harm? The harm is, so maybe for 1 second, you'll think something better about me than maybe you did before. Okay, Genevat Dat. We already saw Genevat Dat's not good. But Tachlis, what's really the problem with all these things? And he's going to summarize this soon, but I'll say it anyways. Hashem's chotam, Hashem's seal, as it were, is emet, is truth. Remember we said, Bereshit bara Elokim. The first 3 letters of the Torah, the last letter of those 3 words spelled the word emet. And in addition to that, in the Aleph bet, the letter Aleph is the first letter, The letter mem is the last letter. The letter taf is the middle letter, and the last one is taf. And that means that Hashem's emet, truths, runs through literally the entire aleph bet. And therefore, when we say something that's not true, and when we do it intentionally, I'm not talking about when we do it unintentionally, but intentionally, then what we're doing is if we're supposed to live by the credo, as it says in the Gemara, mahu afata, just as Hashem is X, so too you should be X. For example, Hashem is gomel chasadim. Hashem does chasadim for us, so too we do. Hashem is mevaker choleh. Hashem visits the sick, as he did with Avraham Avinu, so we're supposed to. And if Hashem's chotam, Hashem's seal is emet, then when we tell a lie, then what we're really doing is we're going against the mahu afata. We're going against this whole credo, this belief that we have to act in the way of God. There's a Latin phrase, which is imitatio Dei. To imitate, Dei, D-E-I, is the Latin for God. So we're supposed to imitate God. And what that means is we're supposed to be like Hashem. We're supposed to be like Hashem, and Hashem is all about truth. Then we have to be. And we can't go out of our way to tell a lie. V'im lo yizdamen lahem yomruhu. Ufamim rabot yomru derech srog de'omnam hechacham hodianu shekol. Who's the chacham? When he refers to the chacham, we're not talking about a modern day Sephardi Rav, because you call a Sephardi Rav a chacham. But we're talking about the chacham mikol adam, who's Shlomo HaMelech. He told us already in Mishlei. Shekol zehu hefech etzon haborei yitbarach hu umidat chasidav. This goes absolutely as antithesis of the will of Hashem. Umasha katuv is what it says in the pasuk in Mishlei. Devar sheker yisnat tzadik. That even the word of a lie, a tzaddik should hate. Umasha ba'al alav azara. This is what it also tells us in the Torah. Midvar sheker tirchak. You should distance yourself from a lie or from a falsehood. And he comments on this. I'm going to make another comment of my own in a minute. It doesn't say be careful not to lie. Ella midvar sheker tirchak. Rather, it means distance yourself from a lie. To wake us up to the idea that how much you have to distance yourself and run away from anything that's a lie. Now, on the one hand, it's telling us, like he just did, doesn't mean don't lie. It means distance yourself as far away as possible from a lie. But there's another meaning behind it. The reason it doesn't say don't lie, even though it does say lo teshakru lo techachashu ish b'amito, in a different place it does say don't lie. But this pasuk is giving us permission. And what's that permission? I'm sure a number of you know that when Avraham Avinu is visited by the three malachim, the three angels in Sefer Bereshit, then one of them was there to tell him that he was going to have a baby, that he and Sarah were going to have a baby. And when Sarai hears this, it says that she laughs and says, oh, come on. I mean, not these words, obviously, but come on, give me a break. I'm going to have a baby and my husband is an old man? V'adoni zaken, my husband's an old man? Later, right after that, Hashem goes to Avraham and says, Lama zeh tzachaka Sarah? Why did Sarah laugh and say that she's an old woman? It's not what she said. She said that my husband's an old man. Didn't say anything about herself. Rashi comments that a person's allowed lishanot, a person's allowed to change their words, shalom bayit, right? Because of shalom bayit, if he were to hear that his wife said, referring to him as an old man, they might have hurt his feelings. And therefore, she was allowed to, Hashem was, so to speak, allowed to say and teach us that sometimes you can change your words for shalom bayit purposes. Now, that's a very broad statement. Let's say, for example, a guy is a gambler and goes out at nights to go gambling and comes home and the wife says, where were you? And he says, I was at work late, or I had a meeting, or I went bowling, or whatever it might be. Now, the reason he doesn't want his wife to know, let's just pretend for a moment, is because of shalom bayit. If she finds out, or it could be the opposite, the wife goes and the husband's at home and the wife finds out, she's going to be very upset. So, shalom bayit, I need to keep my mouth shut. I can lie. No, that's not the kind of situation we're talking about. There are times, and it's not black and white, and something people, I've gotten the questions over the years about where someone can amend their statement So it protects shalom bayit. And other times it's not a matter of shalom bayit. Sometimes it is what it is. And you have to say what you have to say. Otherwise, it's literally just a lie. So just be aware that this is another reason why it says, midvar sheker tirchak, distance yourself from a lie, because there are times where you are permitted to not have to be distant from it and to change your words into what we would call in English a white lie, to protect somebody's feelings. There are, we're going to see in a minute that there's a couple other situations for certain people where it's even more than that. We'll see when we get to that paragraph soon. Let's just continue now. It already says in Sifanya, Sherit Yisrael lo yasu avlav lo yidabru kazav, lo yimatzeh b'fiyam l'shon tarmit. Again, different expressions of we shouldn't have any strain, any possibility of any type of falsehood whatsoever on our tongue, any type of trickery. I mentioned that before, that the seal of God is truth, is emet, uvadai, and certainly. You have to think about this. This is the one thing that Hashem chose to be his seal, so to speak, right? So if you have, let's say, a human king, in not so much today, but in the Middle Ages, and they would have a signet. I want to talk about Hashverosh. You have a signet ring, and that represents who the king is, whether it's the family crest or something else that represented his mahut, his personality, his whatever he was, what he stood for, and that's what Hashem chose as emet. How terrible the opposite of that, meaning telling a lie, would be despicable in the eyes of Hashem. In addition to that, next paragraph. Hashem also gave a very strong warning to us about lying. It said, last week, we looked at this pasuk in Zechariah. We talked about how the people came to Zechariah and asked, like, hey, now that 70 years is up and we're rebuilding Beit HaMikdash and we have a Beit HaMikdash, do we need to fast on Tisha B'Av? He told me you asked the wrong question. Remember, we said this last week, that they should have asked, how do we prevent the Beit HaMikdash from being destroyed again? And he offers, among many things, among them is speak the truth. Now, sometimes the truth hurts. Sometimes you have to tell somebody something they don't want to hear. Among all the Nevi'im, in Ketuvim, it appears that one of the only ones that people actually listened to, and for those of you in the Navi class, you learned this recently, was Haggai. But they actually listened to Haggai. They didn't listen to Yeshayahu. They didn't listen to Yirmiyahu. They didn't listen to Cheskel. They didn't listen to, and on and on and on. I mean, some did. But for the most part, unfortunately, in many cases, their nevuah fell on deaf ears. And it's up to us to listen to the nevuah today and take heed. But in Zechariah, he's telling us the recipe for maintaining the presence of Beit HaMikdash. If it's for maintaining the presence of Beit HaMikdash, even more so in bringing the Beit HaMikdash. So how do you know when you're supposed to tell someone the truth about something or not? Let's say, for example, you see somebody doing something that's not right. So that falls in the category of hocheach tocheach et amitecha. You're supposed to rebuke somebody in a nice way that they're doing something wrong. We discussed this before. And we also made the distinction that if they're for sure not going to listen to you, better not to say anything. But some people live to find mistakes about Korah in reading. Some people live to find other people's pronunciation mistakes. Some people live to find the negative of somebody else. And that's a horrible way to live. And they can't wait to tell them, but I'm just telling the truth, right? They said the word wrong. It's my job to tell them that. Well, maybe it's not. Okay, you don't have to become the self-appointed pronunciation police, the diktuk police, the halacha police. It also depends on your relationship to that person. But again, you might trick yourself to say, well, I went to Mesilat Yesharim class. I remember learning you have to tell the truth. That's correct. But sometimes when the truth will hurt and it's not necessary, sometimes when the truth will not be taken into consideration, actually will be pushed aside, you have to take a little bit of a temperature of the room, so to speak, to decide if you have to say something or not. Which is why if you ask the average person, are you allowed to lie? Most will say no, but. And that but is usually to say someone's feelings, but they don't take into consideration that there are times where it's better to keep your mouth quiet and not say anything rather than to tell the truth. So sometimes it is better to be quiet. How do you know which is which? Either it's a judgment call, you know the person, or by calling somebody and asking, look, here's my situation. By the way, it doesn't have to be a rabbi. It can be anybody that you trust to understand to help you through this particular situation. And then you can make a decision. Do you say something or not? And I know that sometimes you don't have that luxury of time. It may be a moment by moment thing you have to do. But again, keeping in mind, Chotamu shel Hashem emet, that the signature, the seal of Hashem is truth, and you always want to try to gravitate in that direction. It also said, it brings a number of psukim here, also highlighting the concept of truth in the eyes of God. Yerushalayim is known as Ir HaEmet. Not only is Yerushalayim Ir HaKodesh, it's the holiest city in the world, but it's also known as the Ir HaEmet, the city of truth. Maybe they need to move Kikar Safra out of Yerushalayim. I don't know. Anyways, so the idea is that it's, what does it do? Why is it called Ir HaEmet? L'hagdil chashivuta, to increase its importance. When you talk about the idea that the city is that important. Let's say, person speaks even truth in his own heart. Kigon Rav Safra, like the case of Rav Safra. What was the case of Rav Safra? This is again a story that is well known, but it should be even more well known because I think it tells an amazing perspective on how someone can be true to themselves. Shakespeare wrote many things that became not just words in modern English, but also phrases and concepts, especially in Hamlet, in the words of Polonius, speaking to his son and telling him certain things, among others, was to thine own self be true. Now, I don't really usually quote Shakespeare in Mesilat Yesharim, but when it's the Gemara tells us, Chochma begoyim ta'ami. When you find something of chokhmah, of wisdom among the non-Jewish people, you can still believe it, you can still use it. So from in that vein, to thine own self be true means don't fool yourself. Tell yourself the truth and maintain that integrity. That's the right word. So what's the story of Rav Safra? Amazing story. Rashi Mefarish. Hachiyuvda de Rav Safra. This is the story, the case that happened to Rav Safra. Hayalo chefetz achad linkor. He had an object to sell. Uva adam echad lefanav. There was a guy who came to buy it, and Rav Safra was in the middle of saying Shema. And he said to Rav Safra, please, I want to buy this item for such and such an amount. Velo anahu. And Rav Safra didn't respond. Why? He didn't want to interrupt his Shema. Kasavar Zed, the guy who wanted to buy it, thought that the reason that Rav Safra was quiet was only because he didn't want to accept that offer. Valmarni said, no, fine, you won't sell it me for 100 shekel, I'll buy it for 200 shekel. When Rav Safra finished Kriyat Shema, he said to the buyer, I want you to take the product I'm selling, and you can take it for the original amount you offered. Why? My intention was, when you said that amount, I already said fine. But when you raised that amount to 200, I didn't want to give it to you for that. I already agreed to the 100 in my mind, and therefore that's what now. The buyer had no idea. Easily, Rav Safra could have walked away with 200 shekel instead of 100 shekel, but he needed to maintain his own personal integrity to himself. Right? We have this idea. We know, we talked about last week and the week before, maybe even the week before, when the pasuk says, Ani Hashem Elokechem. When we have a statement, for example, Mipnei Seva Takum V'Data Pnei Zaken, where Hashem says we're supposed to stand up before someone who's elderly, and we're supposed to give honor to someone who's older, or someone who's wise. And then it says, I am Hashem. Why? Because these are things that are given over to one's heart. If I see someone walking by who's older that I'm supposed to stand up for, and I pretend I don't see them, well, they can notice that I'm there, didn't get up. They may just think, okay, I didn't see him. But Hashem knows. And that's a lack of integrity. It's also going against halakha. because Hashem told me I'm supposed to stand, I have to stand up. And I saw the person. Same thing is true over here when it comes to telling the truth. You're not just have to tell the truth to somebody else. You have to tell the truth to yourself. You have to maintain your integrity. So that in this kind of situation, if someone came to you and said, I'll give you 1,000 shekel for something, and in your head you said, whoever gives me 500, I'll sell it to them, that does not mean you have to sell it for 500. It doesn't mean that. It means that you would have to sell for 500 when you made a decision that this isn't worth more than 500. I'm not going to take more than 500. And someone offers you 1,000. That takes a tremendous amount of willpower to say, fine, you can have it still for 500. It takes a tremendous amount of willpower because the other person doesn't have a clue. Technically, there's no contract. There's absolutely no halachic obligation to stay with that 500 shekel. Nor in this case would there theoretically been a halachic obligation for Rav Safra to have to take the first offer. But he decided to maintain his integrity. And even if it was just something who kibel balev, he accepted in his heart, so to speak, then in that case, he was able to stand by his word and take the first offer. Why all this? Then it says, Lo diachad heichan chovat haemet magat, to show us, to let us know, or let you know, how far the requirement of truth reaches. Ukvar asru letamid chacham leshanot bediburo chutz mishlosha dvarim. Now, I mentioned to you before, there's certain individuals for whom it is permitted for them to, I would say, straight up lie. And it's only in certain situations. Someone who's a Talmid Chacham. Now, what is the definition of Talmid Chacham? That's up for discussion, not for now. But let's just say somebody who is a very wise Torah individual who truly, almost we get to the point what's called Torato Umanuto, that his livelihood is Torah. It doesn't mean he works as a teacher. It means that his whole life is Torah. Such a person is allowed to lie about three things. I would maybe say the word lie. He's allowed, that says the shanot diburo, to adjust, to correct his wording. And there are three things the Gemara tells us he's allowed to change, which are, it's not in your book, ushpiza, puria, masechta. What does that mean? What happens if someone says to Talmid Chacham, hey, I heard you were by the cones for Shabbat. How are they as hosts? And if he were to say, oh my gosh, they were amazing. The food was fantastic. The food was great. And it really was. Then what could happen is it's Kilu getting 5 stars on Yelp or on TripAdvisor. And all of a sudden, all these people are going to call up the cone and say, hey, maybe we can come for a meal. It's Kilu, he's giving his stamp of approval to them. And therefore, he's allowed to be Meshaneh Diburo. What's Puria? Anything that has to do with anyone's personal, private life. Did you sleep in this bed? Now, for most people, that would be, okay, so what? But the idea that they say this tzaddik, this Talmid Chacham slept in this bed is something, no, I didn't sleep in that bed. Again, it's a longer discussion. The Gemara just talks, I'm just mentioning, and Masechta. If they ask the Talmid Chacham, do you know this Masechta? He's allowed to say no, even though he does know it. Why? You want to learn that? You can go to Masechet Bava Metzia and Kaf Gimel and Amud Bet, and you can look up yourself why he's allowed to do that. But in those cases, those are unusual cases. Those are Yotzei Min HaKlal. If you look in Pirkei Avot, there are multiple statements of Al Shlosha Dvarim Ha'olam Umed, the world stands on 3 things, or Al Shlosha Dvarim Ha'olam Kayam, the world exists. There are different meanings between standing and existing, and there are different meanings behind the 3 things each one of the Tanaim choose. But one of them says it stands on truth. In Kain, therefore, if the world stands on truth, mi shedover sheker, whoever speaks lies, kilo notel yesado shel olam ha'afech mizeh. Someone's removing part of the foundation of the world. Imagine for a moment, our words are what make the difference between the world existing and not existing. Tell the truth, it exists. Tell a lie, and the foundation of the world starts to crumble. You know, someone might say, well, one lie among millions of people who say hundreds of millions of things all the time, what's that going to do? So I'll go back to a mashal that he used for something else. And that was a cup of water that you put into it 1 drop of poison. Now, most people, even if I tell you it's batal b'shishi, batal b'elef, it's even, there's 1,000 parts against that 1 drop of poison, most normal people would not want to drink it, but it's 1 drop. What is it going to do? So too, we have this impression that, oh, my 1 word, if we just follow this literally, it's not going to really affect the world so much. maybe not. Let's just assume it doesn't. But maybe an aggregate amount of all these lies will affect the world, will affect the existence. But there's another way to look at it. We say that every person is a world unto himself. It's not a Hebrew phrase. We know that. But we do know that it is in a different way. It says a person called Mesilat Adam Echad Nisa. If you save one life, it's kilu, you saved an entire world. That's one of the reasons why Adam was created alone. Hashem could have created 3 million people at the blink of an eye. He created one person to teach us a law, a concept that the entire world is kedai to exist for one person. If you kill one person, you've killed an entire world. So therefore, even one person's world can crumble because of lies. And we know that in the literal sense also, by the way. I mean, I guess it's figurative. In the figurative sense, that the person's life can crumble based on lies. Misha Zahir Be'emet, and therefore someone who's careful in telling the truth, he is as if he is maintaining the foundation of an entire world. I think I saved a picture of the screen of this Gemara. I'll explain to you. There was a Gemara in Sanhedrin that talks about a location called Luz, where no one was allowed or able even to tell a lie. And because of that, the Malach HaMavis, the angel of death, was never able to kill anyone who was actually in the city. In order for someone to die from that city, they would have to leave the city. But because the wife of a certain rabbi changed her words, meaning she lied, which we'll see if I find the Gemara real fast. Even though it was for good intention, the Malach HaMavet had an opening to get into the city to kill, until the point they threw her out of the city, because of that. And they returned to their peaceful existence. He says, I don't need to go any further than this and go into any more explanation, because it's just common sense to say that this makes sense. Now, I think I saved this. Just give me a real quick minute here because I forgot to put it on here. Just a minute. Oh, I actually did find it right away. Okay, good. So let me bring it up on the screen. Just a minute. I'll share this with you. Hold on. Oh, here it is. Okay, let me go to screen share. Okay, we'll start from, this is from Safari. It has the Rav Steinsal's commentary. This is the Aramaic and the Hebrew interspersed, but it starts here. It says, Pamachatiz damanti. I once came to a place, the name of the city was called Truth. They didn't lie. They didn't change their words. Why? They were careful to say just the truth. Nobody died there, unless it was their time. In other words, no one died early in that city, and they were protected by the fact that every single person told the truth. I married a woman, and I married a woman from among them, and I had with her 12 children. Two children. Let me go to the next picture. Yom Echad, one day, Yato debitu b'kachayfe reshe. One day, his wife was sitting and washing her hair. So her neighbor came, knocked on the door to come in. Savar, he thought. Now, in the way he quotes it in the Mesilat Yesharim, he says that the wife is the one who told the non-truth, and here we see it's not the case. It's the opposite. We'll see. So her neighbor came to say hi to her, whatever. Came, knocked on the door. Savar, he thought It's not really derech eretz to tell that his wife is sitting there washing herself. Amar la, so he said to her, his neighbor, letahacha, she's not in right now. And since he changed his words, meaning he didn't tell the truth, now the Gemara discusses whether this is a mashal, not necessarily true. Okay, his two children died. Now you cannot say that, God forbid, because a person lied, children died. Okay, this is also known as a mashal. We'll see. So some of the people of the city came, and they said, like, what's going on? A child doesn't die, right? If a child died, someone must have told a lie. So he said to them, this is what happened. I changed my words, i.e., I told a fib, because of it wasn't minumas, it wasn't appropriate, it wasn't polite to tell her what was really going on. Amrulay, they said, please, we beg you, leave the city, and don't allow death to come into the city. Gemara goes on, says that he left the city. Now, in this particular, there's also, this is one that they call this city Emet or Kushta, which is Aramaic for truth. Other places it talks about the city of Luz being the name of the city. But the point is not exactly what happened in this story, but the point is the idea, the power of telling the truth. If you were to say, so far in chapter 11, all the different topics, whether it has to do with saying something that makes someone feel bad, or it's Gneva Dat, or it is a whole host of other things, most people would say that this is probably one of the easier ones to deal with. Certainly easier than Lashon Hara. Certainly easier than Gneva, where we have some ways or others that we do something that that fall into at least an indirect category of Gneva. But telling the truth, most of us are honest people, I would hope. So what's the big deal? But that's the whole point of this chapter. Midat ha-nekiyut. Midat ha-nekiyut, we all know you're not supposed to lie. But we also have to understand that sometimes when we do, that is even something we might consider just minor, but it can have a very strong effect. And not, God forbid, we're talking about from this Gemara. We're not talking about something like that. The next topic, which he does, is just one paragraph, has to do with Chilul Hashem. I think that we all can agree that this is probably a paragraph we could all have written ourselves without him having to write anything for us. What do I mean by that? More often than not, we see things happen and we say, "Oy, what a Chilul Hashem." Now, if you think about what it was that you said that regarding what situation, almost always you will notice that the higher someone is up the totem pole, so to speak, in our eyes or in reality, the smaller the offense needs to be considered a Chilul Hashem. I'll give you an example. If a 17-year-old kid in the neighborhood walks into Mickey's Makolet and steals a candy bar and gets caught, okay, slap on the wrist, probably he's not going to get arrested. Mickey wouldn't press charges. No one's going to say, "Ugh, what a Chilul Hashem." But if the chief rabbi, any one of them from any city, were to walk into the Makolet and get caught stealing a candy bar, that'd be a Chilul Hashem. What's the difference? The same candy bar, same action. If a 17-year-old kid goes on Twitter, or Facebook, or Instagram, or any of the other social media and says something that's not appropriate, yeah, he's a kid, 17-year-old kid doing something. Again, if the chief rabbi or someone else and it doesn't have to be a rabbi, you just, some doctor you truly, that most people revere, or whoever might be. Some of you, I'm sure, familiar with Rabbi Fear, who is one of the Lamed Vavnikim in this world, without a doubt. If you don't know who he is, Google him. He's involved in many people's lives who have illness. He's not, but I'm not going to get into it. It's someone like him, who is a rabbi, who's not a doctor, but knows more about medicine than probably anybody else in the world. In many cases, or knows how to make a shidduch between patient and doctor. And if he were, God forbid, to do something like that, put a post on, which he would never do anyways, on Facebook, something benign, but it's like so not mechubad for someone like him, also could be a Chilul Hashem. But sometimes it can be anybody of any quote level on that totem pole where they can make a chilul Hashem. You are in, so let's say you're in the United States, and it works out better for a guy only because it's pretty obvious. If a guy has a kippah on his head, a woman who may have a mitpachat on her hair may or may not look religious. Let's just say she does. I'm not saying that because there are plenty of other people besides women who wear mitpachot, but only men would wear a kippah. And gets in line at a store and is talking on their phone, having an argument, and they're talking about whatever, the price of something. And it's like the people in line are looking, what is this Jewish guy talking about something about his money, it increases the stereotype. You got to be very, very careful not to enable stereotypes, not to enable a chilul Hashem. Just doing something that's just not right, it's just not right. Give me machalel shem Hashem. So let's take a look now without my commentary. Let's just see what he says about this, about chilul Hashem. Anefei chilul Hashem gam ken hem rabim ugdolim. The various permutations of what we call a chilul Hashem, what it means in English, by the way, is the profanation of God's name. For the word chol, word weekday, secular, not secular, it's not really the right word, but profane, it's a lack of kedusha, lack of holiness. Like Tuesday doesn't have holiness, right? Shabbat has holiness. You have a difference between Yom Chol and Shabbat Kodesh. So there's many different subcategories that have to do with chilul Hashem. Ugdolim heim ugdolim ki harvei tzarich adam liot chas al kvod kono. Why do we have to not do a chilul Hashem? Why? Because how it reflects on us? No. How it reflects on Hashem. These are his children. This is how he raised us. Pasuk says in Navi, we read it during the 3 weeks. Banim gadalti veromamti. It's actually the haftorah of the Shabbat before Tisha B'Av. Shabbat Chazon, Banim gadalti veromamti vehem pashubi. I have raised children and they have rebelled against me. They have been posheh, been negligent against me. This is what I raised you. Imagine a person, a parent, put Hashem off to the side for a moment. Parent raises their child, hopefully gives them a good education, teaches them the right things, and then they go out to be a ganef. They go out to be someone who swindles people in business. It's embarrassing for the parent, right? Because this is how I raised you. This is what I meant. I still love you. Just like Hashem, I still love you, and I can do tshuva, but this is an embarrassment. So we have to be careful with kavod of Hashem. Everything a person does, you have to look into it and really into depth and think. Whatever you do could not produce a form of chilul Hashem. We've already said in Pirkei Avot, echad shogeg ve'echad mezid b'chilul Hashem. If I accidentally turn light on Shabbat, right? So that's one level of chiyuv. In most cases, it's like this. It's a zero. I shouldn't say it's a zero, but I wouldn't receive some kind of a problem with that on my big chart in the sky, so to speak. Because the shogeg, it's an accident, or in some cases it's called mitasek, even lower level problem. But when a person does a chilul Hashem by accident, it's no different than doing it on purpose, which means we have to be so careful. He says, exactly what kind of, give me some examples of what a chilul Hashem is. Now, what he's about to say, and quote a couple of Amoraim, doesn't necessarily apply to you and me, because we're talking about, again, and he's going to talk about this, the higher up someone is, the littler the problem could be to be a chilul Hashem. Amar Rav says, Kigon Ana, like meat, the shakel bisa mitabacha, I buy meat from the butcher, and I don't pay for it immediately, right? I didn't pay for it immediately. Rabbi Yochanan said, "Kigon Ana, like me." Wait a minute, isn't that kind of bragging? Like, look what a big shot I am. If I do that, it'd be such a chilul Hashem. I'll come back to that in a minute. Maybe today, maybe next week. Maybe I'll do it as a teaser for next week. Kigon Ana de masgena arba amot below Torah below tefillin. If I were to walk 4 amot without Torah or tefillin, meaning literally without my tefillin in my hands, without thinking about Torah, or learning Torah, that already is a chilul Hashem. Ba'inyan Shekol adam lefi madregato, lefi mashu achshav beinei hador. Everything is based on the level of a chilul Hashem is based on how that person is viewed by the people of his generation. Tzarich sheitbonen v'vilti asot davar bilti hagun leish kemoto. Be very careful not to do something that would be inappropriate for someone of his stature. The greater a person's importance and wisdom is, so too that person has to be ultra careful, extra careful not to do something wrong. If he doesn't do that, Hashem's name could be profaned, God forbid. Whoever learns Torah would also spend more time on correcting and fixing their midot, their character traits. As you could say, learn all the Torah you want, but if you don't live by the Torah and you act such a way, you get caught doing something and you end up in jail for it in the extreme cases. It's a tremendous chilul Hashem. There are plenty of people that go to jail, right? I was learning in Shalavim many years ago, and I heard on the news so-and-so got arrested for smashing a window in a store. That's exactly the case it was. And I was talking about something. I said, oh, it must be an Arab. I says, no, Jews do things that are bad too. I didn't want to believe it. I come from this idea of utopia. Israel, all the people keep Torah mitzvot. I knew they didn't, but I wanted to believe that. But there are plenty of Jews in jail. But we don't usually walk around saying, oh, what a chilul Hashem, even though it is. But when someone of prominence, and no matter what field they are in, end up in jail, we look at it as a chilul Hashem. This becomes a chilul Hashem, the one Hashem who gave us our Torah, HaKdosha. What I want to do is I want to leave you with that question of how is it possible Rabbi Yochanan and Rav can make these statements. Rabbi Yochanan, who said about if he doesn't go for Amot with tefillin, that's considered a chilul Hashem because look who I am. And someone like Rav made his statement. We'll also maybe take a look at the very end of Masechet. I think it's Sotah. And I think I did this once before in this group, but I think it's worthwhile at this point again to talk about where it sounds like people are saying hey, don't say there's no more Yirat HaChet, because look, I have Yirat HaChet, okay? How do people do that? So we'll do that, Bezrat Hashem. I'll make a note for myself. We'll pick that up with that next week. In the meantime, tell the truth. Be good to yourself. Tell yourself the truth. Be honest with yourselves and with others. Try not to do a chilul Hashem. And if you're going to do a chilul Hashem, do it privately. I mean, there are discussions. A person has a need. They feel they have to do a sin. It says you do it in private. And if you have to, go to another city where they don't even know who you are and do it there. Just don't do it to make a chilul Hashem if you feel you have to do something. So, but I'm not giving you advice on how to do a chilul Hashem. Chas v'shalom. So, on that downer note, have a wonderful day and a great week.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Have a great day.